Hello, welcome back to Rolling to Win Live. Tonight I have Tristan Montoya sitting with us, and he's going to talk about the Art of Allowance. He is the founder of this program, and I sat through a session with him one time. It was an amazing session. I just wanted to share him with my audience here. So, Tristan, why don't you say hello and where you are this evening?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, first of all, John. I am
Absolutely.
live from San Miguel de Allende. I live in Mexico, and it's central Mexico, so it's about 8 hours from the Texas border. But I've been living down in Mexico for about 3 years.
Oh wow, 3 years, huh? So how did you find yourself in Mexico to begin with?
Well, interestingly, I've traveled all over the world ever since I was a teenager. I saved up my money and went to Mexico when I was 19. Obviously, I didn't stay. I made my
Mm,
way back to the States. I got a college degree from Arizona State. And while I was in Arizona, I went off traveling. I did a semester abroad in Spain, and I just caught the travel bug. And it ended up I just couldn't stay put in the States. I tried both coasts. I'm from Virginia. I lived on the East Coast. I went to LA for a time. I studied in Arizona, and I tried to make it work in the States, and I just couldn't
mm.
find a place that felt like home. And Latin America just always called me. And incidentally, I'll tell you what the real reason I came back this time at this point in my life was in 2021 in November. I had just started healing my brain
Mhm.
after living with a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, for 20 some years from having played high school football.
Mm.
And in any case, I went to a brain doctor, and they got me on a treatment plan. And one of the things that I did at the end of the 6 month rehabilitation program, they recommended. I did a series of things. I did everything they asked me to do, but then finally the doctor checked in with me and she said, have you started doing the HBOT sessions? And I was like, no, I haven't. HBOT stands for hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Okay.
Okay.
So they're very expensive if you go to a clinic, and there were clinics in Virginia where I was doing my healing, and they were about $300 a pop. And the doctor prescribed 40 sessions for me, and I said, that's going to be a lot of money if I
Sure,
do
sure.
at 300 per session.
So
So,
so why is that recommended, the hyperbar or what you said there? I can't even
well,
pronounce it.
yeah, well, I needed to get more oxygen into my brain. You see,
Okay.
I wasn't living a normal functional life, and
Mhm.
I'll tell you why I ended up in Mexico, because of this all connects. So
Okay.
I'm
Sure.
not getting off topic here. It's all connected.
No worries.
But the reason being, so basically what happened is they gave me a whole uh, rehabilitation program, the whole protocol, let's say. And the protocol had to do with supplementation, exercise, nutrition, and brain training exercises. They had me learning to
Mhm.
juggle. They had me playing racket sports. Anything that would help me train both hemispheres and kind of connect neural pathways in a new
Okay.
way. My brain was suffering. I was in the beginning stages of CTE, and they had diagnosed me with a TBI and possible CTE. If you've watched the movie Concussion, CTE
Mm.
is when it gets really bad. That's when you
Okay.
start becoming homicidal, suicidal, erratic behavior. You can do harm to yourself or others, and you're miserable. It's like it's living inside the madness of your mind, and there's no
Sure.
way out.
Are you
And
familiar with, like, Chris Benoit? Like, the
who?
pro wrestler? It's a pro wrestler who, like, kinda went nuts, and he killed his whole
No,
family, then hung
no.
himself with his own equipment.
Wow,
Um, yeah, yeah, and the a lot of people say it was steroids, but it was most likely a CTE. So,
wow.
I hear CTE more often than I hear what the acronym actually stands for. What does CTE actually stand for?
It stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and
Okay, and
that's
encephalopathy is like the swelling of the brain or something like that, or
it's a big word.
yeah,
I can't exactly uh, deduce what it means exactly.
okay, fair
It
enough.
was a term. It was a term that was coined by Dr. Bennett Omalu, who's
Mhm,
the Nigerian American doctor who was featured in the movie Concussion, played by Will Smith.
mm, mhm,
In any case, it's basically the worsening of a condition that's already pre-existing. So if the brain doesn't get treated, and you have a TBI and you're living with, so what happens when so I had a bruised brain, basically. I
mm,
wasn't
okay,
brain I didn't put my head through a car window, through a windshield, I didn't have, when they say traumatic brain injury, sometimes you think like, maybe you were in a head-on accident, you went through the windshield. I didn't have something like that. Okay,
Yeah.
I just used my head as a weapon on the football field. And by the time I was in my 40s, I started to realize, you know what? I've had depression all my life, all my adult
Mm,
life. I've had depression, and I'm sick of it. And I couldn't have a real relationship. I'd never had a long-term relationship with a woman. And incidentally, I started doing my healing in Virginia.
mhm,
I got on this hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I bought a
mhm,
chamber. I sent away for it. Ordered it, and the woman had a business in Maryland that was selling these machines, and I
mm,
got one at a reasonable price. They're just, if anyone's interested, they're about, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, depending on the model you get. I topped out at around 5,000, somewhere around there. Plus, I got an oxygen concentrator. In any case, I got on the machine. I not only did I do the 40 sessions, I went above and beyond that. But
mhm,
November 2021 is the date that I remember, because I started to feel like myself again. And whatever that
mm.
means, because you have to understand, I didn't know what mental health felt like.
Sort of like the burden had been lifted almost. The
Yeah.
the the dark cloud that was sitting up here, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Mm, mhm,
look, I've been through an intense spiritual awakening that started in like 2019,
mhm.
or before that, but way sorry, 2009. I started having this
Okay.
intense conscious awakening, this life crisis, identity crisis. That all began like early on. So here I was already in the throes of like a spiritual awakening. My consciousness was changing. I was becoming a different person. And then, during my late 20s and all of my 30s, I'm going through this conscious awakening, and I'm trying to manage that whole transformational process. And then in my 40s, I was just realizing, having a lot of trouble. I was a certified coach. I was helping people in the transformational field, and then there came a time when I could no longer help other people. So I
Mhm,
lost my cognitive abilities. I wasn't able to think
mm,
clearly. I wasn't able to make decisions for my life. I felt kind of like a child. And I had to go back home to my mother's house, incidentally. And, she helped me through the healing. When November came, I had already went before 2018. I was traveling, and I was in Central America. I had gone from Nicaragua up to Guatemala and stayed in Guatemala for about a year, living near Lake Atitlan,
mm, mhm.
right next to this massive lake, in a town called San Marcos. And in any case,
Is that the only, sorry if this is totally off base, but I hear that that's the only place on Earth that axolotls were native.
where what?
Axolotls, it's the little pink lizard-like salamander thing with
I
the
have no
gills.
idea. Yeah.
Okay. My kid was telling me all about it. He's 13. He has a fascination with them. So, and he was telling me that we had to go to that particular lake in Mexico to find them in the wild.
Oh, wow. Well,
So sorry to interrupt you there. I was
no
just kind of
worries.
wondering, yeah,
Is
it's
it
pretty
lake
interesting
in
stuff.
Mexico or lake in Guatemala? This one was in Guatemala.
Oh, okay. Well, they might I think the one he was talking about was in Mexico, but he said Mexico. But
Could be.
the name sounds familiar there.
There's a Lake Chapala in Mexico. That could be
Okay,
it.
maybe that's
So
it.
maybe he's
Yeah.
talking about Chapala. I was in Lake Atitlan. In any case, I'm getting off
Mm,
track, but the point is that, when I left Guatemala in 2018, I had to go home, do my healing. When I did my
mhm,
healing, 2021 came around, November came around, and I ended up back in Mexico for a retreat. I wanted to come down here. There was this tantra festival happening in central Mexico,
mhm.
and I came down with, it just felt very exciting. Joseph Campbell always says follow your bliss, and it felt
Right.
very light and exciting. And I thought, tantra festival, wow, like
Mm.
100 people, 50-50, women, men. And I was like, this could be exciting, right? I've just healed my brain. I feel like a new person. I've never
Sure.
had a long-term relationship. I'm now feeling like healthy again and ready, single and ready to mingle. So I go down to Tepoztlán, Mexico. I go on this tantra retreat, and at the very end of the retreat, the 7-day retreat, I actually met a woman who became my partner, and that was
Mm,
pretty wild because I basically closed down my life in the States. I
mhm,
packed up all my belongings. I even packed up my machine. I had my
mhm,
hyperbaric oxygen chamber came with me It was a fold up. It was kind of an inflatable chamber, so it folds up
Sure.
the size of an inflatable mattress, and the frame breaks down. Everything got packed in my car. I crossed the border and didn't look back, and
So you
so
drove a car down,
I
did you?
did. I
Nice.
did.
So that's a pretty long drive from, say, Virginia down to, by by God, wherever,
Yeah,
Mexico. Like
yeah. It
I
was an
noticed
adventure.
before you get to anything green in Mexico, it's a long ways. It looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, but it was an adventure, and it was actually
Yeah,
really
for sure.
exciting. I left it was interesting, I left, Virginia on the day of a snowstorm, and I got
Mm.
out. I just had this intuitive nudge, like, "I gotta leave now," and, you know, and I told my mother, I was just like, I'm it's gotta be today." She's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "It's gotta be today." The minute I left, she's like, "You just got out in time because the snowstorm just hit." So I'm
Yeah,
on my way down south, and I had a series. I because of
destiny.
all, I have a lot. I've traveled a lot, and I've met a lot of people in my travels. And incidentally, I had friends that I could stay with all along the way. So I made my first stop in South Carolina. An old
Mm.
client of mine, a former client of mine, was living down there. He put me up for a night. I had a psychic friend who works with the Archangel Michael, living in Nashville, Tennessee. Went to see him, and then I camped in this beautiful place. I drove through Mississippi. I
Mhm.
camped in this beautiful nature preserve, and then I went on to Texas and stayed with my friend Austin.
Wow.
And yeah, and Austin's. It was actually San Antonio. It wasn't Austin, Texas, but I stayed with my
Right.
friend Austin in
Your
San
friend
Antonio.
Austin in San Antonio.
Yeah,
Got it.
and that was my last stop before I
Mm.
crossed the border. And then from the time I crossed the border, it was like no turning back.
Did
I'm
you
committed.
encounter any issues when you went across the border and got into Mexico driving an American vehicle with American tags?
No, I mean you hear a lot of horror stories.
Sure. Yeah.
I've had my run-ins with the police in Mexico,
Hmm.
but it didn't happen on this trip down. It actually happened on a border run. Every 6 months. I'm a legal resident now,
Hmm.
but every 6 months, if you're not a legal resident, you got to make what they call a border run. You got to go to the border and renew your visa. And
Mm.
I had a little bit of a problem in Nuevo Laredo. So Laredo, so they in Laredo, Texas, right?
Hmm.
If you cross the border, it's called Nuevo Laredo. So it's
Mm.
just New Laredo and then Old Laredo.
Gotcha.
So one's Texas, one's Mexico. In on the Mexico side, when I went to renew my visa, I must have been speeding just slightly. And well, I was speeding quite a lot actually, and I got stopped. I got stopped.
Right.
And what they do is they basically tell you what your infraction was. We caught you for speeding. You're doing this. And he tells me my window tint was too dark, and so he
Mm.
shows me a list of infractions that he could potentially write me up for, and he shows me a projection of what that might cost me. And
Right.
then they give you this hassle. They say, now what we can do is I can take you over to the station and we can sort it out there, or we can just take care of it right here.
Right.
and
Gotcha.
and that's their hint for a bribe. And so
Hey, big
I'm
man, let me hold $1. Right.
yeah. So basically, it's funny because I had my iPhone mounted on a car mount in the car
Mm.
for
Mhm.
directions and things like that. But he
Right.
looks in and he's like, "Oh, are you recording this?" It's like he wanted to make sure I don't pass the bribe and and get
Oh,
recorded.
right.
So
Yeah.
he's watching for that. But I'm just wanting to get out of there. I just want to
Sure.
get rid of this, take care of this
How
fine, and be
much
on
that
my way.
cost you?
I ended up paying uh, about $100 US, and
Okay.
and and I gave him a lot. He was surprised how much I gave him because no, really, like twenty
You
five
probably
bucks.
could have got $20 and been all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, so a 500 peso note is worth about $25. That's
Okay.
usually enough to make a cop go away. But
Right.
I was in a hurry, and I had to actually cross the border, and
Mhm.
I was going back to Austin, and I had, long story short, I needed to get somewhere, and I had an
Sure.
appointment.
Sure.
I had an appointment to get to, and I said, "This can't take up any more of my time." I gave him 2,000 Mexican pesos, and he was like, "Wow, okay, be on your way." And I'm like, "That's
Right.
what I thought."
Right.
And for me,
We're friends for life
yeah,
now.
yeah. For me, it was just it was a short little blip, but in the whole
Mhm.
grand scheme of things. But the fact
At least you
is
didn't get hemmed up, like that'd be,
no,
I hear Mexican prison's pretty rough.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with it. You don't want to mess with it. You don't
Right.
want to talk back. I speak the language, and I
Mhm.
don't talk back. I do it. You have to be you have to appreciate
Sure.
the politics and play the
Sure.
game, right?
I'm kind of curious if you'll back up just a little. Like you were stomping around Guatemala and Nicaragua and all that down in there. Like, what'd you find? During those years, the years before,
Yeah. Well, basically, I mean, the
or
interesting
what were you looking for?
what was I looking
Either
for?
one of
Well,
those.
I was looking for community, and
Hmm.
honestly, I was looking to kind of self-expression has been a big theme in my life. Okay,
Hmm.
and
Is that like not being able to, or needing to self
needing to
express? Okay,
needing
got it.
to and
Mhm.
having some limitations, like self-imposed, if you will. I mean, I
Sure.
can't say all I can tell you is that there's been a deep desire in me to be self-expressed through
Hmm.
creativity, through writing, through movement, through dance. I love dance. I love writing. Um, I don't, I'm not an actor, but I actually like theater, and I like
Hmm.
things that anytime I can be expressed, anytime I can take on a character, anytime I can embody, but really the biggest juice that I get is being embodied and expressing what's true inside of me. And if it comes, letting that ultimate creativity flow through, ecstatic dance has been a big part of my life. And when I was in LA, that was ecstatic dance was a big part of my life. So the reason I ended up in Central America, I had been out in LA for about 4 years, okay, from about
Hmm.
2014 to 2018, somewhere around there. And during that time, I was a freshly certified life coach. I had my certifications. I went out to LA to kind of meet my soul family. I knew a few people out
Hmm.
there, and I just
And
felt
is
like,
this from ASU to LA?
no, I mean, believe it or not, I've crossed coast many times. I've gone
Gotcha.
to Europe and back several times. I've gone to,
Sure. Sure.
I've lived down in Central America, South America,
Hmm.
Colombia, Brazil, Argentina. I've really lived in a lot of places, 10 countries in total.
Wow,
And
that's
so
amazing.
I've really crisscrossed the globe. I haven't really hit Asia. That's kind of my next thing on my list, is like explore some countries that challenge me a little bit. Like, I've spoken the language in the countries that I've gone to.
Hmm.
But the fact is like, when I went to LA, I tell people this story. I think it's kind of amusing. I've lived in 9 foreign countries, and LA was the biggest culture shock I've ever experienced. So try to imagine what I
I
mean
hear
by
that a lot. I hear that a lot, actually. I'm in a few acting classes, and a lot of the actors are in LA, and they moved from
yeah,
like Iowa or Indiana or somewhere, and they say the exact same thing, that
yeah.
LA, there's no place on earth like LA.
No, it's one of a kind, and the people you meet there are off the wall. I mean, they're off the
Mm-hmm.
wall, creative. They're borderline, crazy. I mean, I mean, some people. I mean, look, you have your extremes in LA. You
Sure.
have the wealthiest 1% living in Beverly Hills and all these exotic. There's neighborhoods there that would blow your mind.
Hmm.
The amount of wealth is just unfathomable. And then you can go down to downtown LA, and you can see Skid Row and see
Yeah. Right.
the degenerates. I mean, it doesn't even feel like the human species. It feels like some kind of bad movie.
Post-apocalyptic
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
it's absolutely post-apocalyptic. It feels like a bunch of, like, zombies walking around. You have
Hmm.
no idea it's totally unpredictable. You can walk through that place and just you never know what you're gonna encounter. So, but, in my time in LA, I was introduced to, first of all, I lived on the West Side near the beach. So, I landed in Marina del Rey. I was introduced to a famous actor right away. He owned a spiritual center, and
Hmm.
I mean, it was kind of amusing because here's this Hollywood actor, and he owns like a spiritual center, and it's
Hmm.
kind of like a church. You go to it on Sundays, and it's like it's kind of the whole, it's the whole everything you'd think, all the stories you've heard about cults and things like that.
Right.
You would think it kind of has the feel of a cult, but honestly, the guy was he was well intentioned. He just wanted to bring together some good people with
Right.
no
That's how
rigid.
most cults start out.
Exactly, exactly. But it was in all fairness, I mean, it was just, good people coming together. There's no religious affiliation. It was just, song and prayer and just honoring, the sacred. And in any case, um, I got introduced to this community. I even got asked to speak one time at
Mhm.
one of his Sunday presentations, and got some clients out of that. I mean, that was kind of cool. I got to speak about what I do, and some clients found me after that and wanted to work with me. And so I'm starting out my life coaching career in LA. I'm meeting all these really really amazing people. They're highly creative. They're filmmakers, producers, artists, visual artists,
Mhm.
people that
Mhm.
are designing the stages and art installations at festivals. So I got introduced to the festival culture, lightning in a bottle, stuff like that. And I start going to these amazing festivals that blow my mind. I'm into the ecstatic dance community there, and it started to bring out my expression. It started bringing out my creativity, and I'm evolving as much as I can in LA. My business picks up a little bit. I got asked to volunteer.
Mhm.
Do volunteer teaching at a high class, like a very very upscale rehab center,
Mhm.
and before I knew it, I was getting clients out of that, and very challenging clients, by the way. I wasn't trained to work with addicts,
Mhm.
but I ended up working with, people that had some real, real deep issues. Okay. And that ended up being like quite an adventure. I had some really volatile
We have
clients.
a quick question. What
I
is
see that.
ecstatic dance?
I see that. Well, ecstatic dance, basically the ecstatic dance is a free form dance, and it's basically, the music can be anything from tribal to house to and melodic beats. Even like some people put
Mhm.
on like kind of like there's the different elements to ecstatic dance, right? There's
Mhm.
even a modality called five rhythms, and five rhythms is different from ecstatic dance, whereas ecstatic dance is purely free form. Five rhythms may incorporate the earth element, the fire element, the air element, right? The water element. And then you're kind of moving through the different elements as you dance.
Hmm.
Ecstatic dance is really you put on a DJ set, and the DJ set may take you through a gradient, like it may take you through different levels and different styles of music. And basically what you're doing is you're just letting your body move freely. You're
Mhm.
letting the expression come through you. There's no talking on the dance floor. There's no substances while you're dancing. They prohibit substance of any
Mhm.
kind.
Okay.
And that way we're conscious, we're aware, we're in our
So we're not at
bodies.
a rave.
Yeah, we're not at a rave. It's not a party, but it's just a conscious. It's just an expression. It's a place for people to come together and be self-expressed. It's a
Okay. Nice.
non-judgmental space. So you
Sure.
can really move your body and get into. You can really you can really test your limits. Like you're human. Like your my body could do things on the dance floor that I wasn't even aware of. I was a
Mm.
gymnast in high school, but I never knew what my body was capable of until I got into ecstatic dance and started opening up my creativity. So
Nice.
when you're surrounded, sometimes our ecstatic dances in LA got up to 100 people. If you can
Mm.
imagine 100 people in a room with high energy music, you can, and with no rules, you know, and everyone's sober, thankfully, because if they weren't, you can only
It'd
imagine.
be a mess if everybody was
Yeah,
getting trashed. I've
yeah,
been to a rave. I went to raves in the '90s when raves were raves. Thanks for your question, Shannon.
yeah. It wasn't pretty. Raves weren't pretty, and
No, not back then. Nowadays, they're really a lot more organized than they were. Because
absolutely.
the I was out in San Francisco in the late '90s. I never made it down to Southern California, but that's where I went to raves over in Oakland, and oh man, it was such a time to say the least.
Sure.
I won't really get into all that. I mean, we went wild.
Well, it is a wild thing, and like the EDM, they call it EDM now. Like that's my generation didn't call it EDM, but now it's called
Sure.
EDM. And so I mean, the fact is like EDM can still be associated with raves and that kind of that underground culture. Ecstatic dance has kind of brought the underground into the light and just said, hey,
Hmm.
this may not be a mainstream thing yet, but it's open to everyone, and it's drug
Hmm.
free, drug and alcohol free, and let's take the darkness out of this underground culture and just make it,
Sure.
bring the light into it and make it acceptable to be self-expressed and not need drugs or alcohol to
Mhm.
be expressed. So it's a very pure way of expressing. I got into that. It was hugely beneficial for my mental health. I tried out different forms of dance, like contact improv, which stands for contact improvisational dance.
Mhm.
Another amazing connectional dance. And all of a sudden, I started really getting in touch with like my artistic side through dance. And in any case, ironically, like while I was having this heightened experience through expression, my
Mhm.
brain was already collapsing. My brain was already
Hmm.
I was starting to experience a lot of mental health challenges in LA.
How old were you?
I was in my, so I turned 40 when I got to Guatemala. And so in LA, I was like between the ages of 35 and 39, around there.
Okay.
And that was a time when I thought I'd be in my peak. I thought I'd be in my prime, and I thought my career would take off. I thought I'd meet the woman of my dreams. I thought I'd maybe settle in LA. I don't know. I went to LA with the intention of I'm going to make it work. I'd have no
Mhm.
dreams to become a Hollywood actor. Everyone comes out with this Hollywood dream. I just
Sure.
want to make it. I just want to make it in my profession. I want to do something meaningful. I want to connect to a community. And I found that. I mean, I found a good community. I wasn't dating at all because my mental health was really suffering, and I was reclusive. I was social as much as I could be, but then I'd like hide behind my closed doors for three,
Mhm.
4 months out of a year, every year, and I was always dealing with this, with battling with my mental health, and finally my mental health just started to shut down. I bounced around, even though I was looking for stability in LA. I bounced around. I had 7 different homes in LA.
Mm.
Bouncing from one
Was it like
apartment.
roommate situation
Yeah,
or?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I tried to keep on good terms with everyone, but I lived with some really erratic people. You know, I had a crazy vegan roommate
What's
who
up,
attacked.
Rory? I see you there.
I had a crazy like vegan roommate who attacked me one time because I forgot, and I left a turkey sausage in the freezer, and he was like, he had adamantly said like no meat in this household, and I'd forgot when I moved in. I'd brought all my food items, and I had thrown some things in the freezer, and there was a few turkey sausages in there, and
Mm.
he shows it to me like, what is this? And I was like, oh man, I forgot about that. He's like, and the guy almost attacked me. I mean, it was almost a physical altercation. I thought, this is wild, man. I've never seen people so like irate about. I mean, I get it. I violated a rule of the house, but is physical violence necessary for that
Man,
kind of thing?
people get nuts anymore.
They
Like,
are. Yeah.
you got a bunch of emotionally immature people out here running around calling
Yeah.
themselves adults, and they go, "You
Exactly.
can't tell me nothing because I'm grown." I'm like,
Yes.
that's the first sign you're not grown is when you have to tell somebody you're grown.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's
Yeah.
a whole other thing.
Yeah. So people
Um,
get really like they're very self-righteous. They're very like, I
mm,
believe this and this is how the
oh
world should
right,
be.
yeah.
Nobody should eat meat. And so LA just kind of on a lot of levels, it just kind of freaked me out. I was like, this is a wild place, and I don't know if so LA, like other places I've been in the world, starts to push you out if you're not kind of embraced within this
Right,
energy. It
right.
starts to kind of push you out. And I started
Sure.
feeling the push. I started getting kind of
Okay.
pushed to the outskirts until I ended up living on a boat. I lived out my last month on a boat. I did. I
That's as
rented.
close as you can get to LA and not be actually in LA.
Exactly. I was literally like, my boat was rocking at night. Like the waves were, I
Right.
was living in the marina. I
I
was
bet
living
you
on this.
slept good though.
I slept all right. It was kind of cramped quarters, but I slept all
Mm-hmm.
right. And by the time I was done with LA, I heard about this retreat in Nicaragua, and basically Nicaragua was calling because there was a retreat happening. I wanted to be a part of it, and I
Mm-hmm.
signed up too late to be a facilitator at that retreat. So I
Okay.
spent the last bit of money I had. I was really trying to get my career to take off. I was doing anything possible, and there was this millionaire coach that was holding this retreat. Her name was Jules, and Jules and I knew each other through a mentor of mine actually.
Mm-hmm.
And my mentor said, "Well, hurry up and get on the ticket because you might be able to be a facilitator at that retreat." I didn't get on the ticket soon enough, and I ended instead of being at this luxury property in Nicaragua with all the other participants, I ended up next door, and I was like in the town. I wasn't at that retreat center.
Mm.
celebrating with all these guys. I was in this little dumpy town next door, and I was living in this little surf shack that a friend of mine had loaned it to me. So I
Wow.
mean, and I mean, literally, when I say shack, I mean shack.
Oh, I
There,
believe it. I
there were
believe it. Yeah.
scorpions and spiders crawling the walls at night.
No.
I had a mosquito net, but I was like
Right.
tucking that thing in on all sides. As like,
Right.
I mean, literally, a tarantula is the size of my hand, and I was just like,
Oh
"This is
man. Mm.
wild." So now I'm like, my brain's failing me. I didn't make the cut on the retreat. I'm in this surf shack. There, it's crawling with creepy crawlers, and I'm just thinking to myself like, what has my life come to, you know? But I
Mm.
did my best. I spent some time down there. I did yoga every day. I meditated every day. I learned to surf down there, and I just really started communing with nature. And I thought, let me get back to just some let me get back to just a simple life. I've just unplugged from a city of 30 million people, and now I'm
Mm.
in this little surf town with a a couple thousand people, and
Sure. Sure.
if that. I mean, the town I
So,
was
so
living
what
in.
kind of support network did you have that kept you there?
Well, eventually, when that retreat was over, I was able to link up with a group of expats, and
Hmm.
there was a community house that everyone was living in, and I was able
Okay.
to affiliate. So basically, if it's like staying at a hostel.
Sure.
It was a big luxury property with a pool and this massive open air living room, and like it was
Hmm.
actually a super nice house. We had this like infinity pool. We had like a bar there was like a bar in the
Right.
pool. Do you know what I
Nice.
mean? So you could like swim up bar kind of thing. And now, so I go from surf shack down the beach to this exotic, like, MTV Cribs kind of house
Right.
with a bunch of digital nomads. And then I start thinking of, like, okay, this is a place where not only I can get clients with some of the people that are residents here, I can also record content. I can
Hmm.
do all the things that digital nomads do. I can start my online business. I have the resources and I have the stable internet. And so then everything started to look up.
Hmm.
I did from in Nicaragua. It was kind of cool. I got hooked up with a circus community, and that was a wild part of my trip because
Yeah, I
basically
bet.
I went inland. I was living on the coast in San Juan del Sur, and I was living on the coast in Nicaragua, and I ended up going inland to Lake Nicaragua, and I stayed with a circus community on a small island in the middle of the lake, and with 30 people, co-ed. There's some beautiful women there, and there are
Sure.
some really fit young men there,
Now, did
and
they have any bearded ladies? Because it's not a real
no,
circus unless they
no,
have bearded ladies.
it was a real like new age circus concept. So people
Okay.
were people were doing, they had a couple rigs set up there, so people were doing the what do you call that with
The I guess the twirling on
yeah,
the
yeah.
curtain
There's
thing,
yeah, I want to say flares,
whatever
but
it
that's
is.
not the right
I
word.
think
There's
it's
a
got a cool Cirque du Soleil kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
forget the name of it, but people the spinning ring and
Hmm.
the I don't I forget the name for that. Maybe someone knows in the audience who's listening. But in any case, we started training on this island, and since I was a former gymnast, I thought, well, this is cool. I get to train. I get to do some things that I used to do, um, practice mobility, flexibility, strength, and all this cool stuff. And then
Hmm.
there was a space to offer workshops. And so every day we filled our days with workshops. There was a big board drawn, Monday through Friday, and then times, on the board, and you
Hmm.
could sign up to offer workshops on any given day. You just had to schedule in advance.
Wow. So you're living with a circus community in the middle of a lake on an island in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Like, where do you think your life's going from here?
Well, that's the thing. I'm like completely surrendered at that point. I'm completely like I realize that there's this magical flow going silks. Thank you. Yes, it's called silks. I don't know why I said flares. They're called silks because that's what they are. They're like silk ribbons coming down from a rig, and the girls and the men, I guess, you can tie them. You kind of tie the silk around
Right.
yourself, and then invert yourself upside down and do all these crazy things. The women that were doing the silks were stronger than, I mean, I have a lot of upper body strength, but I'm telling you, these
Sure.
girls had more endurance than me. They had more strength than me in
Oh, I
the
bet.
right places. in the right
Hmm.
places, because they could stay on the silks longer, and they could do more things that I wasn't able to do.
So, were you
And
thinking of becoming a performer?
well, I was thinking about how can I add value to this circus group? What can I
Hmm.
do to be a part of this group? If I were to affiliate with them, what can I do to support the community? I became their resident coach. I was kind of their in-house coach and practitioner. So I was doing.
Okay.
I'm trained in a modality called emotional freedom techniques, and I was
Hmm.
doing sessions for all the people. And what's interesting is that some of these people were high performing athletes, and
Hmm.
they had long backgrounds of performing at a high level. Some of them did do Cirque du Soleil. We had a couple
Right.
people from
Okay.
Cirque du
Wow.
Soleil. Now, when you're a high performance athlete, you need to be mentally and emotionally sound. And everyone who's lived in existence on this earth has some sort of accrued trauma or stuff in their mind body that
Oh
needs
yeah. Yeah.
needs to be worked through. And so here I was sitting first. There were three founders of this circus group, and all three of them came to me for a session. They were so pleased with the results. They told everyone else, "You got to try this. You got to do this. He's really good." And
Hmm.
then I did a class for the whole group. This woman had
And it's
persistent
called emotional freedom. Is that what you said?
emotional freedom techniques,
Techniques. Okay.
EFT. Yeah, and
So, what's that about?
well, it's basically like, I'll give you an example. I did this class for about 15 or so of the people who wanted to attend that day, and I took a volunteer from the audience, and I offered to help her with whatever pain she's experiencing, whether emotional, physical, mental. And she said, "No, it's actually physical." She goes, "I've had this persistent pain in my arm, I think it was, and for about 15 minutes, what I do is there's a couple different phases of the sessions. The first phase is we call it resourcing. It's just I
Mm.
have to. That means basically I need to get some background on you. So I got a little bit of background on her story. I asked her where this pain come from, and she told me it came from an injury, and that injury happened when she was training as a young athlete. And she did something. She exerted herself during this performance or routine or whatever it was, and she hurt herself. She overexerted herself, right? She tried to do something she probably knew she wasn't ready for, but she tried it anyway to see if she could push herself, and she ended up injuring herself.
Mm.
The injury didn't fully heal, and she suspected that there was a reason it wasn't healing, and that's because she held some sort of like guilt, or she was shaming or blaming herself. So
Mhm.
in the emotional scale, so Dr. David Hawkins created this emotional scale.
Mhm.
I have a couple of his books. One's called Letting Go: The Pathway of Surrender, and the other better known book by Dr. Hawkins is Power versus Force. In both those books, he's got the diagram, and he talks about the emotional scale. And what he says, if you can look at the emotional scale, what you can see is that shame, blame, anger, fear, all those are very low emotions. They
Mm.
register at a very low level. And he tested these using emotional kinesiology. So this girl she was holding herself in this constant kind of shame of like, I betrayed myself. I don't trust myself. I didn't, I hurt myself, and that's my fault. And it's like,
Mm.
think about that. Like we all have an inner child, right? But if you're a child and your parent keeps blaming you for something you did, you start to develop a trauma around that, right?
Mhm.
So what happens if a person inflicts, like, if a wound is self-inflicted and they continue to exacerbate that wound by speaking negatively to themselves, then what happens is the physical manifestation becomes pain that doesn't go away, right? So now she's got this pain in her arm, and it doesn't go away, and that's exactly where we were.
Yeah,
Ometepe.
I had to check it out. I was like,
Yeah,
all right, that's
yeah,
far out there. So
yeah. It
you're
was.
on
It was.
this little island in the middle of
Yeah.
like Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Wow.
I lived on the Ometepe for a month. I was in a different spiritual community on the island of
Mhm.
Ometepe. But the fact is that within this Lake Nicaragua, there's little isletas. They call them isletas, which basically means small island. And we
Mhm.
were, when I was with the circus community, we weren't on the big island of Ometepe. We were on an isleta. It was a little patch of land. and
Okay.
it was so tiny. Eventually, the circus community moved onto the bigger island of Ometepe. But when we did this, when I did the 30-day residency with them, we were on this
Hmm.
little patch of land that was so small they had to widen it with like man-made wooden yoga decks and things like that.
Cool.
So we just had a small little space. We had a little patch of grass that we could use to set up the rig for the silks,
Hmm.
and we had a couple yoga decks where we could do breath work and yoga classes. And during that time on the island, like I said, they gave us free reign to host any kind of workshops that we wanted. I hosted breath work, I did contact improv, I did EFT classes, and little by little, I started to develop my gifts. I started using some of the training that I had, and I started to offer that to the public and get immediate feedback. What's working? What do they like? How can I improve? How can I make this better? And
Hmm.
the circus community eventually took me to Guatemala, where I ended up living for a year. And the rest is history. I worked as long as I could in that field until my brain started shutting down. And the tragedy in the story, if you want to call it that, is that, at the height, at what should have been the height of my career, was the beginning of my demise, because then my brain started shutting down and I couldn't do anything to control it. I had to go back home and I had to get a brain scan, and I had to figure out why am I not able to perform at a high level, because I want to be at a high level because I'm working around high performing athletes, right?
Sure.
I want to be
Right.
the high performance elite coach. And I was reading all these books on elite performance and supernatural this and superpower that, Dr. Joe Dispenza. I was doing all the stuff. I learned heart coherence meditation. I was doing everything I could to make myself into a better human and even to connect to my heart. But all the time, my brain was shutting down and I couldn't
Mm.
control it. And I became very despondent and depressed. And that was the beginning of the end for me. So I had to kind of rebuild from that point, and it just took a total shutting down.
So from there back to Virginia,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then how long were you back home with getting things right? I guess.
It took me 3 years. It took me 3 years to
Okay.
get my life back on track. And I didn't
Virginia
even
is a
know.
good place to do that.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Luckily, I'm lucky, and I honestly I mean that. Not everyone has family
Hmm.
that they can turn to, and not everyone has good family. They may have family members, but not everyone wants to be around their family. Not many families are supportive. A lot of them, have delivered. So many. I'm telling you, John, throughout my career as a coach, it's unbelievable what I've heard people tell me. It's unbelievable. The things
Yeah.
I've heard people tell me that have happened to them, that's been done to them by their family members, it's atrocious and
Sure.
unspeakable. I can't even speak about the things I've heard because they're so atrocious. And hearing all those stories, I can honestly tell you that I was raised in a pretty normal family. We're
Yeah.
not every family's got their dysfunction, but I
Sure.
at least had two loving parents who still love and care for me to this day, and who I can speak to about anything that's going on. And not everyone has that. And my mom is like an angel on this earth. I mean, she and I have a great relationship. um, During my 20 years between 20 and 40, I definitely suffered from depression, and there were
Hmm.
times in my life where I had to dip back home and stay a while and get my shit back together, as they say. But when I moved out and got my coaching certification in 2014, I thought that was it. I was like, I'm good. I remember I gave her the key to her house, and I was like, I'll never need this again. you know and I gave it back to her
Hmm.
before I left. I said, thank you so much for letting me stay. I'm good. I'm healed. I'm starting my life over. I go to LA, and then, like, several years later, I'm circling back, and I
Right.
was just like, no, is this happening again? And it's like, what do you say to that? When but all I can say is that my mother has a big heart. She was committed to my healing. She understood. She was compassionate. She didn't
Hmm.
make me feel like less than, or like a
Sure.
weak. She could
Or
have.
a loser. Didn't make you feel
Yeah,
like a loser.
never, not once,
Right.
not once. And I needed that. If she would have shamed me, I would have taken my life. I kid you not.
Right.
I
Right.
was so close to taking my life. If she would have turned the knife and just, I can't
Sure.
believe you're home again. And if she was this
Yeah.
bitchy mom, like you loser, you good for nothing. If she was like that,
Sure.
I would have been done for, because
Right.
my dad had no compassion for me at the time. He wasn't living in the house, thank God, because my parents had split up, and so
Okay.
my dad was in Philadelphia. But my dad didn't understand the mental health condition I had, and he still doesn't to this day.
A lot of dads don't seem to.
No.
But also, if you look at a lot of dads, they have their own stuff going on that they refuse to admit is going on,
Well, that's
and
the
and
thing.
and it usually comes out as like a projection toward the son or whomever,
Yeah.
really. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a lot of emotional repression. It's suppressed and repressed emotion, and the inability, or lack of knowledge on how to deal with that. No one taught my dad how to do emotional awareness
right,
training. You
right,
know, my dad was raised by a strict disciplinarian Catholic
sure,
Spanish man. You know, he didn't have any affection growing up. He got the
right,
back of a hand. He got whipped with a belt. That
sure.
was his discipline. If you
So,
don't,
so was your dad like first generation, or is he second? Like when did your family immigrate on your father's side?
well, the interesting thing is that our on my father's side, our history dates back to the Spanish Inquisition, and
Okay,
our family's been in New Mexico, what's now United States, since for 400 years. So
okay, gotcha,
we yes,
gotcha.
I mean we didn't exactly. I mean we have more
You're as
years.
native as I am.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
my family's been here since Jamestown, so it's
Sure, sure.
yeah,
And Jamestown is a lovely Virginia settlement. So
sure,
we weren't white Anglos, from Scotland, Ireland, England kind of thing.
yeah,
My mother's family came from Germany,
okay.
um, and my father's family came from Spain.
I guess I was just trying to gauge like how old your, I guess that'd be your grandfather was, and then
Yeah.
his father,
Well, he
because
was.
my grandfather was born in 1913.
uh,
So he lived through like the Depression, World War II,
sure, sure,
Prohibition. Like when he
sure.
started drinking, I guarantee when he started drinking was during Prohibition. When you couldn't get your hands on nothing, so he learned how to drink pretty heavily, and he
Oh
passed
yeah,
that on through his son, and passed that on even through me until I finally put an end to it several years back now. But
absolutely.
yeah,
They,
so
they
that whole like you be a man, stand on your own, all
yeah,
that stuff.
yeah.
I was just kind of wondering if we had similar grandparents there.
We do, and I'll tell you what. Both my grandfathers, both the German and the Spanish side, both of
Hmm.
them. My grandfather, Strickert, the German, he was only first generation, mind you. Like he actually
Mm,
had a German born parent, and so
okay.
he was first generation American. But my grandfather on my dad's side, even though his first language was Spanish, our
Hmm.
our ancestors had lived in New Mexico for 300 some years.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
but he came from a very working class. Both my grandparents were very working class, came from nothing, built
Hmm.
themselves up, built themselves into blue. They
Sure.
went, they were both. They were both. One of my grandfathers died a multimillionaire, and
Mm,
the Spanish grandfather retired the vice president of a banking branch.
hmm.
And I mean, that was a pretty good accomplishment for him. They both fought in World War II. They both battled with their demons. My grandfather Montoya, he was an alcoholic, and I heard lots of stories from my grandmother had to pack the kids in the car and go look for him, go to the bars that
Oh
he
gosh.
frequented and pull him out of the bar sometimes and say,
Wow.
"Dinner's on the table. You better get, we're
Yeah.
here to
Yeah.
get you home." And
Yeah.
leave me alone. And she'd have to drag him out of bars, and he'd be,
Generational curses, man.
yeah, yeah. And I've dealt with that it didn't. I read this meme the other day, and it said something about it's very unsettling for a child to see their parent drunk. It can be very
Mm,
unsettling. It
mhm.
can it can throw off your whole um, perception of reality, because your reality is based on a foundation, and the foundation is I've got these two parents, and at least I know like they're solid in my life, and they're good role models. And once you see your parents unstable physically
Yeah. Right.
and drunk, it can throw off your whole basis of reality. I never saw my parents drunk. They liked their wine, and they had a glass of wine with dinner, maybe 2. I'd never see him overdo it. My dad had a
Sure.
liquor cabinet, never saw him overdo it. He'd never hit the liquor cabinet. It was just for special occasions. He'd bring out his nice cognac glasses or something like that.
Hmm.
I never saw him drunk. And I'll tell you, like, I went on a beach vacation when I was in high school. I went on this beach vacation with one of my good buddies, my neighbor who I grew up with, and his family took me to their beach house. And he was the father was a wealthy lawyer in the D.C. area, and we went to their North Carolina. You're from North Carolina, you know,
Hmm.
Katie, not Corolla. You know Corolla Light?
Corolla.
Yeah, it's a beach
Yeah,
town,
I'm
and
not really sure. Is it on the Outer Banks? Is it one of those?
it's near there. It's near there.
Okay.
So there's a town called Corolla, and it's in kind of an upscale, second home kind of beach
Right.
home
Right.
environment
Yeah.
for upper class people. And
Hmm.
so I went one time with my friend's family. We stayed in their beach house, and we were kids. We were high school kids. We were sneaking beers from the parents, and we happened to dip back into the house one night as we were dipping out and drinking our beers on the patio. We snuck back in to check on the adults, and they were rip roaring drunk. I mean, they
Right.
were rip roaring drunk, and I'll never forget my
It's
friend's
vacation,
mom.
man.
I know it is, I know, but to see his mother, my friend's mother, was sloppy drunk, and not only
Oh yeah.
sloppy, she was an angry drunk, and
Oh.
I was getting friendly with the cousin. They had a cousin that was about my age, and she and I were kind of smooching and going out on the beach and making out. And I come back, she's like, she has that nasty face on, and I can tell she's just shit faced. Excuse my
Yeah.
language, but I think I can use real
Sure.
language. So she's just shit faced, and she's like, "You trying to fuck my niece?" And I'm just like, "Whoa! I can't believe she just said that." I said,
Right.
"I said we're just kissing.
Of
It's
course
really."
not.
I was like, "It's innocent.
Of
It's
course
innocent."
not. I would never think of that. What do you mean?
But I mean, we were high school kids. I mean, it really was just innocent. We were literally just walking on hand in hand on the beach,
Right. Right.
watching stars and
Yeah. You
kissing
don't
on
know
the.
what the hell is going
w-
on.
And I
Yeah.
never expected to come back into the house and have her like just confront me
Flip.
like that
Yeah.
in front of everybody. And
Sure.
I could, looking in an adult's eyes when they're pissed drunk, it's frightening for a child. I mean, I was still a child. I was still 16,
Oh
17.
yeah. Yeah.
I was
You see
looking at
all
her.
that animal anger
Yeah,
coming out.
it
Well,
was frightening.
alcohol shuts down the prefrontal cortex, so the
Mm,
part that makes you human and
yeah,
and is your decision making is very inhibited. So hence she's operating on the mammalian brain or even reptilian, depending on how drunk
absolutely.
she is. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah,
it's
and it was
far out,
scary.
man.
It was scary.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I bet.
so I'll tell you. I mean, I've had my bouts with alcohol, and it didn't help that I had a brain injury because I think speaking of the prefrontal cortex, I damaged my prefrontal cortex when I was
Mm,
playing football,
hmm.
and
Hmm.
something just wasn't right with my brain, and I took the alcohol to kind of soothe my issues around
Sure, sure.
my emotional
I did it for
issues.
years myself. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's a crutch, isn't it? It's what we kind of go
very
to
much
to,
so. Very much so.
but it inhibits all the emotions that actually want to be there. So if we can just like, I didn't learn to be with my emotions for a long time, and when
Mm-hmm.
I got into all my training and retreats and workshops and mentors and all that, I eventually learned how to process my emotions. But before I learned how to process anything, what do? We self-medicate. You would go
Right.
to the drugs and alcohol, and that was my
Well,
go-to. And
follow
so,
after whoever our examples footsteps were,
yeah,
really.
yeah.
Like my dad, his dad, drunks. I mean, I hate to say it like that if my little brother's watching, because he got a whole different dad than I did. However, he still got the same a drunk dad, but it was a different dad.
Yeah,
Either way, yeah, you just think about. I tell you, man, and that's what they did. So it's like, in order to be a man, you had to act like that because that's your example of what a man is,
yes.
or at least for me, it was. I mean, maybe not you, but my dad was very functional. It wasn't like he was, he would. I mean, he'd drink a lot. He'd be like beer shot till only 9 o'clock at night. Cause that's like, I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock, but every day he would be pretty much like well lit, at least a 6 pack and 6 shots. So I guess that's like a 12 pack or something. So I
Wow.
thought that's what you had to do to be a man, was that
Wow.
and smoke cigars and drink bourbon,
Right. Right.
Um, and around probably around that same time that you were talking, for you, you get antsy around 2009. You and I are pretty much the same age. I think you're probably only a few months older than I am,
Oh
but
wow.
um, around 2009, I was like, okay, I need to stop drinking and really do something with my life. And that's when I kind of laid down alcohol and made a move to go out to Tennessee. And it was in between 2009 and 2010 to join a Bible Institute to really learn how to be an evangelist of all things, believe it or not. Uh, and anyway, so yeah, I got that bug that said you got to go somewhere. Same deal, around that same time. So I think that I was talking to a Ayurvedic doctor the other night, and uh, they have very similar stuff. I forget what it's called, but it's these portions of life. You know how life is sectioned off, sort of like, and um, these different things that happen to people during these different intersections in life. So it's very interesting to see anecdotal evidence of that. Just you and I talking, that you and I both around the age of 30 took off to go somewhere and check something out. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's just wild to me.
Have you heard about the Saturn return?
I don't think so. Mm-mm.
This is a sometimes it's a commonly known thing like in the spiritual community, but sometimes it's not that much talked about. And I think it's an interesting idea to talk about because they say this. So the Saturn returns. It has to do with the planets, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Saturn comes around every 30 years, apparently. So around the
Yeah, it's a
time
28-year cycle
28.
to
So
circle the
so
sun.
so around 28, 29, you're approaching 30 is when your first Saturn return comes. Now, this is a big opportunity. That's when I had my spiritual awakening. Something started shifting
Hmm.
inside of me. I started opening my eyes. I started seeing the world in a new way. I started reading new books, exploring new topics,
Yeah, wow.
having an internal. I started having an inner life. I started to understand like what it meant to meditate, what it meant to find stillness. That came around the time I was 28, approaching 30. And
Hmm.
they say that if you ignore this time in your life, if you bypass it, if you're too busy, see, life just shut me down. I had to deal with it. I was going through horrible depression, and I ended up just facing my demons head on. Now, if you don't face them and you avoid it, we call it bypassing in the spiritual
Hmm.
community. And let's say you got a busy job and family commitments, you just don't have time, and you
Sure.
just plow through it, drink through it, blind yourself, whatever
Right.
you got to do. You may miss the boat, literally. You may
Missed
miss
the
the chance,
takeoff point.
yeah,
Yeah.
to have your real life, to be fully expressed. Your soul came into this body not just to be this working machine, this mechanical, you know, unit that just kind of moves through life,
Right.
just eating and
Just
fucking and
meat
sleeping.
puppet.
Yeah, like we're actually the soul's trying to have its life, as I like to say. And if you miss the boat at 30, you might have to wait till 60. So
Right.
that's encouragement for anyone who's below 30. Just know that that time is coming. It has to do with the planetary alignment, and it's calling you to step into a bigger life.
Well, also in your 20s, you're supposed to be learning life anyway. Like that's when you're supposed to be exploring. You're not supposed to be like tied down to anything. You're supposed to be experiencing life, and then you hit that takeoff point for the 30s. You can fly high like an eagle,
Yeah,
as the Sadhguru said.
yeah.
And then there's another takeoff point again around 40 ish. Um, that he was talking about, another takeoff point there where you can't quite get as high as you would have if you had started earlier.
Ah,
So I think that's what you were talking about, though, is like you missed that takeoff point. So then you
yes,
have to wait for the next takeoff point. And then
yes,
after 40, the next takeoff point would be around 60.
yes.
Exactly.
And
So
that's a long time to wait.
yeah, it
And
is.
you can really, you can really miss out on living an authentic life. And some people don't make it to 60. And that's the
Right.
tragic thing is like, when are you going to start to live your authentic life? And that's the big
Mhm.
question. It's like, are you going to be held captive by a career that's ultimately unsatisfying and just keeps you in the rote, routine of paying bills and,
Right.
living this rote existence when there's a bigger life waiting for you. And what I got this message that I had this really profound experience when I was back in Virginia. Um,
Mhm.
I'd set an intention to write a book, and I got my friend Celeste involved because I'd needed her for accountability. And I told she's a great friend of mine. She's a brilliant woman, um, and I just called her up and I said, "Will you hold me accountable?" And I got a little kitty that wants to join join the party here.
Right on.
I asked her to hold me accountable for to write this book, and I was waiting. I thought this book was ready to come through, and then all of a sudden, I got sidetracked into like going into the gene keys and exploring all this different stuff,
Sure.
and I started to have this profound connection to spirit, to source, to whatever that is, whatever that higher power is. It started communicating with me in such a clear way. It blew me away. I mean, it
Mhm.
absolutely blew me away. I was getting clear directives. I was being told to prepare these private ceremonies for myself, where I was going deep into like these initiation type experiences.
Mhm.
Where I had this one experience where I literally went into the black hole. I literally, my
Do
soul was
any of
pulled.
these involve psilocybin?
None of them, none of them. These were
Wow.
like these were absolutely drug free. And
Okay.
I was pulled into the abyss one night. I had created this ceremony for myself, and I knew it was about to be one of the biggest ceremonies of my life, and I had no idea what was coming. I just knew to
Hmm.
prepare. And when I was pulled into this abyss, I met God. I mean, that's the only way I can explain it. I met the unknowable, the faceless, the divine. I can't explain it. It was just going. It's like going into a black hole, into this cosmic nothingness, and completely letting go. I had to completely surrender anything, any preconceived notion about what I thought God was. And
Mm.
we think God is so holy and so profound. And you know what God told me to do before I met God? God told me, clear your anger.
Mhm.
And I had been, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I'm going to keep going. I had found this wizard staff. I was going on hikes in the woods in Virginia, when I was living back home, and I'd found this crooked kind of wooden, staff kind of thing, and it
Mhm.
was it was amazing. It was a great walking stick, but it made me look like a wizard when I carried it. And so my intuition told me, tonight when you prepare. I was out in the woods walking in the snow, and I was sitting on these rocks, and I'd heard very clearly, go home, prepare for ceremony. And then when I and
Hmm.
I left my walking stick. My walking stick helped me get through the snow, and I was trudging back to my house. And then I leave the walking stick outside because it was all covered in snow and mud and everything.
Mhm.
And Spirit says, go outside and get the stick and bring it in and put it
Okay.
on the altar. And I said, okay. And here's what's funny. Just a year prior to this ceremony, I was in San Francisco for a men's retreat, and on during that men's retreat, they took us through a grief ceremony. And in
Mhm.
that grief ceremony, this is a thing. This is, you can look this up. There's an actual website. This is an actual grief ceremony that you can do at home, and I highly recommend it. I'll try to find the details for anyone
Right
that's
on.
interested and post about that. But there's four things. There's four items in that in that
What's
in
it
that
called? I'll pop it on the
I
screen.
don't have the name. I have to kind of
Okay.
go through. I have to go through my notes, but I have it somewhere. It's shared in my notes. I'll share with you the link. But there's four corners. You set up kind of a quadrant on the floor, and then you sit in a circle around the quadrant. One person goes into the middle of the quadrant. You work with the four corners. You place an
Okay.
item on each of the corners. You have dead leaves, that represents loss. You have an empty bowl that represents the things you couldn't quite achieve. It's like the emptiness
Mhm.
of the things you wish were in your life but aren't. And then you have a rock, and that represents anger. And then and or no the rock represents fear. And then you have a
Okay.
piece of wood, and that represents anger. Okay.
Hmm.
So I remembered from that ceremony that we grabbed the piece of wood, and you would just channel all your anger into it. And so when I was told to bring my stick in and place it on the altar, I had made a little altar. And I was instantly, I'm not a, whatever your religious affiliation with, I'll probably anger some of the Christians here, but I was told to kind of place a picture of my gurus, and I don't have any like actual gurus that I worship.
Mm,
I just had
sure.
teachers. Okay, I just had teachers. I studied Wayne Dyer. I studied Paramahansa
Mm.
Yogananda. I studied Alan Watts. I studied from Ram Dass, and
I like Alan Watts.
they were all really interesting people, and they all had profound things to offer. But I had
Hmm.
put each if I had a book, especially with their picture on it, or if I had a picture of each of these avatars or teachers, I placed them on the altar as kind of like representative of, I'm about to go deep into ceremony. I'm about to meet God. These were the
Hmm.
men that prepared me for my spiritual journey. Wayne Dyer happened to be my first spiritual teacher, and I never met the man. I never met him. He trained me through
Sure.
books, videos, and just his presence was so disarming. It was so comforting.
Hmm.
His booming, powerful, masculine voice, just, I called him my spiritual father. So now I've got the piece of wood set up on my altar, and Spirit says, God says to me, says, now pick up the piece of wood. And I picked up the piece of wood, and just
Hmm.
like that ceremony, he said, now channel all your anger into it. Tell me how you really feel. And God and I just had a real conversation.
Mm.
It was like two dudes talking. It wasn't like, I am God and listen to me. Like, he's like, tell me how you really feel. And I'm like, how I really feel? I'm like, fuck you, God. And he's like, yeah,
Mm.
give it to me. He's like, give
That's
it to
rough.
me. And I'm like, fuck you. I was like, fuck this life. This life is so full of fucking suffering. Fuck this shit. Fuck you. And he's like, give it to me. And I'm
Hmm.
like, and then I had this thought like, oh, this is sacrilegious. I'm being disrespectful. And God's like, you think I invented those words? You think you're telling me anything I don't know? Like, you can't hurt me. Your human words can't hurt me. Get it out of you. It's making you sick. All this shit
Mm.
inside of you is making you sick. Give it to me. Give it to the wood. The wood's in your hands. Channel it into the wood. And so I channeled all that shit into the wood. And all these things started coming out of my mouth, just, expletives one after another.
Hmm.
And I just really gave it to God. And God's like, nice. You done? And I'm like, I think so. you know, after I was done with all that, and he's
Hmm.
like, now you ready? And I'm like, ready for what? And then I was like, then the ominous kind of feel started happening.
Hmm.
And and then I knew I was going into the abyss. And I called for Wayne Dyer. I called for him, as if he were like, going to come and save me. I don't know why, but I called him Dr. Dyer. That was just the name that, instead of like Wayne, I was like, Dr. Dyer, are you there? And I just heard, and he's already passed over, you see.
Sure.
And so he's over in the spirit realm, just kind of hanging out, looking on like spectator in my initiation. And I look for Dr. Dyer, waiting for a sign, waiting for him to appear to save me, to guide me into this
Mm.
abyss. And I just hear his voice just like he sounds in person. You're on your own, kid. and at that point I was like, I get it. There's the
Sure.
avatars are here, the spirit guides are here, but they can't do shit for me. I've just got
Right.
to surrender and let go. And so, long story short, I met God that night. I went into this abyss. I lost track of all time. I don't know what happened. I just know that it was the only thing I had to compare it to was actually a ceremony that I had with Bufo. Okay,
Mm.
because Bufo was the closest I got to the God consciousness, and this was
Okay.
the close. And I used to tell people that did Bufo like religiously. I used to say, "Great, you've had this experience of oneness. Can you do it without medicine?" And I kind of dared them to have that experience.
All
Ultimately,
right.
I had that experience, and I didn't even mean for it to happen. I didn't intend for it to happen. It just happened, and I led up to it
Sure.
because of all these initiations that were happening. So
Wow.
that's kind of how it unfolded, and from that point on, I just realized like God was giving me a new assignment, and the new assignment was cosmic career counselor. That came later.
Cosmic career
Cosmic
counselor.
career
That's
counselor.
that sounds far out. I like that.
But what he wants me to do at this point, and I don't know
Sure.
how this affects the rest of the world. I'm waiting to see if a lot more people are starting to get the call, because I believe, and you can tell me if
Mhm.
this resonates for you. I believe we're passing the point where we're here just to do some utilitarian job, like a
Right.
mortgage. I mean, we need mortgage brokers, we need
Sure.
cashiers,
Sure.
we
Right.
need
Right.
waiters,
Or
waitresses.
do we? Or
Yeah,
do we?
or do we?
Because really, if the whole system fell apart and the humans that are left behind were to come together and just love one another and share the abundance that the earth has,
Yes.
there'd be no problems whatsoever at that point.
Yes.
So
And
maybe we're at a point of transcendence in that aspect, to where the old world has to crumble away, sort of the Kali and Shiva, like the destroyer and the creator.
yes.
Unless it's destroyed, nothing can be created. So there is that.
So here's the question. Here's the question that I want to explore with you and the audience who's ever
Mhm.
listening is what can we do to begin to evolve out of survival consciousness? Because what keeps us in an unsatisfying job. Look,
Mm.
I was raised by a father who was a provider. Like I said, I came from a loving home,
Sure.
and my father was a provider. He worked a stable job for 40 years, retired from the government with a
Hmm.
pension. He did everything by the book and wanted
Right.
me to do everything by the book.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
there was only one thing wrong with he did nothing wrong. He did everything the way that it was supposed to be, right?
Right.
Grow up, go to college, get a job, marry, buy a house, uh, get put your kids through college. He did all
Sure.
those things. He did
Right.
everything by the book. There was one thing wrong with that equation. He wasn't satisfied.
Yeah.
He
Right.
didn't work a meaningful job. It didn't bring the best out of him. He had regrets, and I could hear those regrets communicated through his voice. When he spoke
Sure.
about his life, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. And
Hmm.
I thought to myself, okay, he did everything by the book and he wants me to do everything by the book. Now I have a choice. Do I follow him or do I follow
Hmm.
my own path? And if I
Sure.
follow my own path, there's a chance I'm going to fall flat. There's a chance
Hmm.
I'm going to look like a failure, or there's a chance I could succeed wildly.
Kind of looks like a bumpy takeoff most of the time.
It is. It is. They say that if you're following your own path, it's wild. It's a
Yeah.
wild. If you're following your true path, it's virgin. It's wild because no one else has walked it. You're walking it
Sure.
for the first time. You're
Yep.
not going to know all the steps. You're not going to know what's 10 feet ahead. You're just going to have to go one step at a time. One step at a time. You're gonna, I had a grief ceremony for myself the other night. It was a couple weeks ago. I was working with psilocybin, and I had a grief ceremony just for myself. And you know
Mm.
what I was grieving? It was 15 years of looking like a failure in the
Mm.
eyes of my peers, my parents. I've had
Hmm.
to endure looking like a failure because I chose to follow my own path. And I don't
Sure.
have all the signs of success that an adult at my age ought to have if one were to follow the prescribed path,
Right,
right?
right. Which usually just means get yourself in a bunch of debt and then work the rest of your life to pay it off, so that you can hopefully spend the last 5 or 10 years and own your house and get a pension.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the question is if we could rise above survival consciousness and this need for menial jobs that allow us to eke out a living, but ultimately keep us dissatisfied and dispirited, then what would we be doing? What would we be doing with our lives? What is calling? I don't think I'm the only one. I had a calling early on, a calling
Mhm.
towards creativity, expression, writing,
Sure. Right.
healing, the healing arts, doing ceremonies, doing all these cool things that I've gone and done. I had a calling towards that. Do other
Mhm.
people not have that calling? Do they just say, "No, I'm satisfied with a menial
I
job"?
think a lot of people quench it, because
Wow.
and I think a whole lot of times that comes from maybe an authority figure, be it a parent, teacher, whatever, says, "Well, you can't do that."
Mm,
Whatever that thing is, like, say it's an artist, right? Like, "Oh, I really want to be an artist when I grow up, Dad." Well, if you want to be an artist, you'll probably starve like all the other starving artists.
right. Right.
And instead of going, well, it might be tough for a little while, but if you figure out some marketing scheme or something like that, then perhaps you could be a very successful artist, and push somebody toward their actual dream. And then I think that maybe in modern society, that it's so good now that kids are being pushed toward their dreams, but they think they have to go to college for it, and accumulate that debt and become that particular debt slave to society because of it, because they have been told that they can do it, right? So I go to school for a master's in basket weaving of the Middle Earth or whatever, which means nothing in real reality.
Sure.
Um, I think that maybe that is a huge problem, is that kids are being pushed not where their skills are,
Yeah,
because and they've never taken the chance, because we live in a society that's very self-centered and selfish. So being self-centered and selfish, we only want what we want, and we don't even look at what we're good at, or
right,
even what makes us happy, because the things that the ego conscious mind wants may not make you happy in the end anyway.
right. And I'll close with this, and I
Hmm.
like telling stories, but I'll tell you a short story about something that happened that I experienced um, around college, my college years, just after
Hmm.
college, and this kind of defined it planted a seed in my mind, okay, and I never
Hmm.
forgot this lesson. I graduated from Arizona State, and one of my good buddies from Virginia moved out to Arizona as well, but he went to my rival school, U of A, the
Hmm.
Wildcats. So he's going to U of A. I'm going to ASU. We both graduate. He moves out to San Diego, and I go to visit him in San Diego at some point. Okay, he's living in downtown Gaslamp Quarter, San Diego, and he's palling around with a lot of up and comers. These guys, he must the guys that he was hanging out with, three of them are millionaires now. Okay,
Hmm.
and
It's
at that
awesome.
time, yeah, at that time when I met them, two of them were one was a part time waiter at a high end what's that high end steak place, Morton's.
Ruth
He was at
Chris.
Morton's. He was the captain at Morton's, so he was making
Okay.
bank. He was making
Right.
$300 to $500 a night, not doing too shabby.
Yeah,
But
that's pretty good.
but in any case, he was hanging out with these three guys, and they were all like up and coming millionaires. But they actually had one friend who was an actual millionaire, and
Hmm.
he had a suite, he had a penthouse in this glass condo building in downtown San Diego. He drove a Lamborghini, and he had the most pimped out penthouse you've ever seen. You could
Nice.
push back a whole wall of windows and just have like open views of the water and everything. It was wild. I mean, just exposition kitchen, 20 seats wrapping around this exposition kitchen.
Mm.
Wild, wild penthouse. He had two fridges in his place, stocked with whatever you wanted. It was so we'd go up and hang out with him. The guy was from the Czech Republic, and he was raised in Switzerland. And he walked me in. He walked me. I was fascinated by his story, and he walked me around his penthouse. He showed me his laboratory, and he actually worked out of the house. And I said, how are you generating this much money from working from home? And he
Mm.
said, I make teeth. And I go, get the fuck out. He goes, I make teeth. He goes, dentists, when people need teeth,
Teeth. Okay.
teeth. I make
Yeah.
teeth. And I said, how the hell did you figure out you were good at making teeth? And he goes, come into my laboratory. And he shows me all his machines. And when dentists need a tooth made, a replacement tooth,
Sure. Right.
they send it out to guys like him. They send it to the lab. The lab will take about 2 weeks to make your tooth.
Right.
He's the lab. He was the lab for
Wow.
several high-end dentists. So he's making these high-end teeth. He's making tons of money. He's got a Lamborghini to prove it and a boat. He took us out on his boat one time. So this guy's living large. He's making tons of money. And I said, I'm just curious. I said, look, we're us guys. We just got out of college. We don't know what we're doing with our lives. How did you figure this out? And he goes, well, I grew up in Switzerland. I'm Czech, but I grew up in Switzerland.
Mm.
And the Swiss have this career aptitude testing that they do when you're in grade school and in
Mm.
like grammar school. So as you go through the ranks, they start testing you, on all different kinds of things. What materials do you work best with? What are what coordination skills? What cognitive abilities do you have? What are you most, in a room full of all these different things? What do you gravitate towards?
Mm.
They start testing you on all your capabilities, and they just found out in some strange way that this guy was had an aptitude for working with his hands
Mm.
and not just a mechanic, with tools. He was a
Right.
craftsman. He was a craftsman.
Right.
And
Wow.
in any case, they discovered that, and they put him on a career path that ended up creating a lot of success for him. And what I took away from that story is, why aren't we all doing that? Why
Sure.
aren't we all finding what we're best at when we're young,
Right.
and then designing a life around that, instead of just going through these rites of passage, cor- college educations
Right.
that go
Right.
nowhere, general education that teaches a bunch of nonsense we never ever use. And why aren't we drilling it down to, no pun intended with that.
Yeah.
You see what I
But
did there? little dentist pun right there. But why aren't we drilling it down to what we're best at, and putting people into the careers that they're best suited for, and that they can
sure.
have the biggest contribution, and ultimately the most satisfaction and fulfillment from. So
Well, hell,
that
by the
put
time
me.
you're 25, you've gone to college and now you don't know what you're good at anymore.
Exactly. You've been put through the system. You've been
Yep.
schooled in every which, thing under the sun, and now you're confused about where to even take it and go from there.
Right.
That's the education factory that we've produced. It's a mass education factory that
Yeah.
produces cattle. And the cattle
Right.
are just supposed to, fill these menial
Bavarian
jobs.
school model.
Yeah, and it just keeps us stuck in a underproductive society that's really going nowhere. It just serves the elite and keeps people, like cattle. You're just getting what's the term? You're just they're just
Sheep,
yeah. I
cattle.
mean
That's about right.
it's
Livestock.
like, yeah, you line up to the trough every
Yeah.
night. You get your
Right.
daily feeding, and then you go back to your stall, and it's really kind of a metaphor for how we're living these days. And no one stops to say, wait, we're so much better than this. We're so much more talented than this. We're so much more creative than this. I have so much more to offer than this job could ever bring out of me. Why am I stuck in this job? And the only answer anyone can ever give you, gotta pay the bills, don't I?
Right.
Gotta pay the bills.
Got to pay
Got
the bills.
gotta pay the bills. What if that just dramatically shifted?
Yeah.
And what if
Yeah.
what if doing what we love helped us pay the bills?
Sure. Sure.
And
I
plus
I
some.
it, I kind of I agree with that. I don't disagree at all. I do think that when you look at the less advanced peoples on Earth, right, the tribal people, then I'm sort of thinking more keenly on the tribal Australian people, the first people of Australia. They used to migrate across the continent for the seasons, and everywhere they went was the food they ate as they went,
Mm,
and the journey was life. And they did have time to do, rock painting and stuff. I'm talking the 60,000-year-old rock carvings, rock paintings that are in Australia. So I think that life, even though it might not have a long lifespan put to it, I think that it's easier to be happy there because your purpose is to make sure that everybody eats every day,
mm,
or your purpose is to make sure everybody has shelter when the storm is about to come. Your purpose is to take care of one another, opposed to pursue individual interest. It's in the interest of the group that everybody works together for survival. And it's not necessarily survival mode because the earth is quite abundant. And if you look, those people actually terraformed hunting grounds so that the species that they hunted would do well, so
mm,
that every year when they got there they would be able to hunt them
mm.
and have the proper food source and stuff. um and
Well,
I think in getting
you're
go
talking about
ahead.
thriving. I mean, the word that keeps
Yeah.
popping to mind is thrive, thrive, thrive.
Yeah.
They're surviving because they're living. They're having to survive to live, but
Right.
they're learning to thrive in communities. They're
Right.
coexisting in a model, in a way that allows them to thrive in whatever way that means.
Sure.
And
Sure.
we can take that model
It
that
sort of dissolves at a certain level though of population. So the sweet spot is less than 200 people,
mm,
because once you get into something that's more than 200 people, it just becomes more complicated. Sort of the rat utopia model, even, where all the rats started having all these problems because everything was so good. and
sure.
and and I think that maybe we're in modern society living more like the rat utopia than the people that predated us, that really had enough and were able to commune and see the sky and know where they were in the universe without a scientist to tell them where they were in the universe.
Mm,
To really be tapped into that, the logos, as the Stoics put it, which is the divine order of everything, and just
yes.
be really tapped into that.
Yes.
And I would like to see where we're all sort of tuned to that, which I think that if you look at the real example of Christ and Christianity, it was to love your neighbor as yourself and love God with all your heart. If God is in everybody, then you need to love each and every person like they are God indeed. And then you have to love yourself like you are God indeed too.
Mm.
And in that, it's sort of that meme that you see that is like all the people in hell with the long spoons, that they can't feed themselves, but you can, and then in heaven they're feeding each other.
Mm.
And I think that particular meme bodes very well in modern society on account of if we were to reach out and help one another, then we would all have it sort of equally as good. And I'm not talking like
Right.
socialist utopia, but I'm talking to actually be concerned for the modern man or be concerned for a fellow man. Like, be happy when they're happy, be sad when they're sad. Like, oh, gosh, you lost a parent. That's terrible. Or, wow, you got a new Mercedes. That's awesome. And we've come to this place where it's who do they think they are driving a Mercedes Benz?
Mm.
Because obviously, if they have a Mercedes, they must have gotten it because somebody else doesn't have something.
Mm.
So that's where we are as a society right now. And in order to change that, we're going to have to really dive deep and find that divine nature inside that says, I can love my neighbor as myself. And I think that that's kind of what you're all about with the what is it, heart, brain, you have another word for it,
Coherence.
coherence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to that, and that's why I thought it'd be awesome to have a conversation with you this evening.
Yeah, for
Overall.
sure, for sure. Well, this is, I mean, that's the idea behind coherence. It's
Hmm.
about the process of achieving heart brain coherence is unifying the mind's energy with the heart's energy.
Hmm.
But the bigger metaphor, the way this plays out is that once you achieve individual coherence, then you
Hmm.
can come into coherence with another person. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone where it's just your mind against their mind? You're mentally like trying to like one up
Mm.
each other, or
Oh, right,
have you
right.
ever felt this before? It's
Sometimes, yeah,
just two
yeah,
minds just going trading
yeah,
intellectual
yeah.
knowledge.
I
Boom,
tap out
boom.
pretty quick.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not ideal, but it's
Yeah,
become a way that human beings think they have to relate. I am this mind, you are this mind. We both have brains, we
sure.
both have intellect. We will therefore relate from our intellect only. And it's like drop that awareness down and just come into the heart and just like relax in the heart. Like there's a different feeling and a different space
Right.
that you're accessing. And
Hmm.
you're going to speak more honestly and truthfully when you're in your heart center. You're going to
Yeah, for
connect
sure.
to the humanity in another through the heart center. You're not going to connect through here. We can
No.
tell stories all day long and try to relate to one another, but it's truly just dropping into the body, into the heart, and then connecting with one another. When we generate this coherence and it kind of spills out into the world and we become heart-centered individuals who connect to others through the heart, we start to create this field, right? An
Hmm.
electromagnetic field. And we start to generate more positive feelings, more positive thoughts, more positive intentions. And we start to co create something that's much higher frequency.
Hmm.
And this
Being
is what,
gracious for things, etc.
yeah. And this is gratitude is a big part of it. And that's a big piece of the heart map. I developed this tool called the heart map, and it's got
Hmm.
three main values at the middle of the heart. One circle is compassion, the other is acceptance, and the other is gratitude. With those three core pillars or values, we come into heart-centered awareness.
Hmm.
Right? Without those values, you're swimming in what I call the sea of suffering. You're pushed out into what I call the outer mind, and the outer mind is just a form of awareness that's just saying, "I am this, I am this brain, I am this mind, I am this. This body is what I am." And it's like, no,
Hmm.
you're this divine being, but you got to go within to learn about that, to connect
Right.
with that. And until you do, until you get through the proverbial sea of suffering, which is a whole like reservoir of filthy stuff that we don't want to, it's a moat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the moat surrounding your castle. And to get
Right.
to the castle and to come home to the divinity of who you are, the royalty of who you are, you got to swim through the shit. And a
Yeah.
lot of people aren't willing to do that. And so we're
Sure.
marooned out in the mind, and we're marooned in the intellect. And my work is just trying to get people to come back to the heart. And it's not an easy road. You got to swim through the shit. I'm not going to lie about it. I never do. It's not an easy road, and not everyone will take that path. But if we want to advance as a human species, we must become heart-centered. There's no
Perfect.
two ways about it.
Nice. I think that's a perfect spot to end it up on there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate your time. So we'll have to talk again sometime soon. But in the meantime, you be good down there in Mexico, man.
Appreciate you.
All right, John.
Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pull you back here. And, well, we just talked with Tristan Montoya this evening. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment, ask questions. And the next show is going to be on Friday. We've got one at 10 a.m. and then another one, which is interesting. There's a lady who is in charge of a shipwreck of Nazi origin off the coast of Argentina that we'll be talking to this Friday. All righty. Till then, see ya.